I wanted to thank Ruth Evans for inviting me to speak today, and hopefully I'll be available through Skype as well. I wanted to comment on a few areas that I found quite interesting for us practically on the paper. One of them was on the fluid relationship of kinship families. We've done a lot of research on kinship families in the past, so I found that quite interesting. The other one is how people understand death, the reasons for death, explanations for children, and also how a death is registered, and then the importance of rituals of death, which I think was very important for our teams in terms of the response for Ebola. And the other part that I found very interesting was on the formal and informal systems, and it seemed like how important the informal system was compared to the formal system. And then a little bit of a discussion around how things might change in terms of stigma around death. And I guess that goes back into understanding death. So for the fluid relationship of kinship families, we looked a lot at how children move around from family to family and how often stigma and discrimination can happen within the family unit. So it would be interesting to know a little bit more about when family units are disrupted and a child goes to live informally with another family, how they're treated, and what the reasons behind the death, if there was some kind of stigma around the death, if that has any consequences on how the child's treated. And that goes back into my understanding of death, and I found it quite interesting that I know very few people talked about the reasons why a person had died. And I wonder, in terms of things like Ebola or HIV and AIDS, how important that reason is. I know in the West we do put a lot of importance as to why someone died in terms of how we explain it. And I know that there was so much sort of fear about Ebola that people were trying to hide the reasons why someone died. With Ebola, of course, a lot of the rituals that people have with death, they couldn't do in terms of touching the body and burying the body themselves. And so the WHO, together with a lot of NGOs, talked about alternative rituals. So in terms of, could they plant a tree to commemorate someone's death instead of actually being there in person, because they still couldn't touch the body. And how that was communicated and how that was understood given communities' normal responses. It would be quite interesting to see how that feeds into the research that was found. And then I also wanted to talk a little bit more about the formal and informal systems in terms of, it seemed like social protection programs were not well targeted and were underfinanced and reaching a very small portion of the society. And there was a lot of discussion as to whether or not that's about targeting. And I think that one of the things that we've been trying to struggle with a little bit more is how we involve the informal system much more in terms of making people aware, spreading messages, and then connecting them with the formal system where it exists, but recognizing the lack of capacity in the formal system. The other thing I found quite interesting was the importance of schooling and costs for school, and how that might, play out in terms of the death of a caregiver. And then, like I said, in terms of stigma, this paper didn't discuss stigma specifically, but it also didn't talk necessarily about what happens when there happens to be stigma around the reasons someone died. So those are the immediate responses that I have, and hopefully on Skype I'll be able to go into them in much more detail. Thank you.
Fallo Njarem gerem nala hono godo bite Mawra dam tat bi do men on am ni ma